I've heard about the Star Trek Starfleet Academy series coming out, and I want to give my own take on it. I've heard that there are bad reviews coming in, but I want to tell you about my interest in Star Trek and why I feel that I could be just as competent a series creator of something like this. So stay tuned. Unlikely event that this video becomes viral, I want to say hello. Where have you been? Hi, welcome to my YouTube channel. All right, now to the serious part. I've had some immediate thoughts about Starfleet Academy, the new series that has presented, I think, both episodes, the first two episodes, well, not both, but the first two episodes on YouTube. Of course, being a Star Trek fan, I have followed, not necessarily watched, but I've watched clips of them, and I've watched YouTube channels talking about Discovery and what they call the new Star Trek or new Trek. To give you some context, I became a true Star Trek fan in 1987, beginning of 1987, although I had seen a little bit in a few years before that. And it's a very personal thing for me because I was a fan of Star Trek during elementary school, middle school, and high school, and onwards, when I got the very clear message, I got the very clear impression that other people in my class would not understand Star Trek. I felt I was the only one. And still, even now, I've talked to acquaintances and I've used Allegory to movies and television and films and storytelling to portray what I'm really, feeling through life situations. And unfortunately, I've encountered a lot of times when, quite a few times when people don't understand my allegories. They just become lost. I'm hoping that the ability to see allegory is not becoming a lost skill, because that would truly be something harmful to our society and for for coexistence, getting used, getting acclimated to each other and so forth. So anyway, I think that from what I've heard, the people making Starfleet Academy seem to be designing it with like member berries, remember this, remember that, and they're not thinking through from the perspective of a television series creator. I know I'm not professionally a series creator, although that was my aspiration. That was my career aspiration. I think they're a bit misguided in how they're treating the franchise and how they're adapting the franchise, the Star Trek franchise, to a modern audience so that it could keep both audiences. More than once, I've heard a reviewer talk about how, not just of this series, but of Discovery and so forth, how they seem to be somewhat like aggressively abandoning the Star Trek fans who have been with Star Trek for a long time. You can't kick them in the face. You can't kick the old fans in the face for the benefit that you see of gaining a new audience, because you get an audience for a product that doesn't resemble Star Trek. If you veer too far away from Star Trek, you will alienate the Star Trek fans. You will you will destroy any point there is of creating a show with the label Star Trek. Call it something else. Now, my perception is they're not doing that with the Starfleet Academy series. I think they're trying. I hope they're trying. But I want to give you my take on how I would do a Starfleet Academy series. Okay, so for those of you who don't know, before I go into that, I want to explain a little bit further about my experience as a Star Trek fan. I promise it'll be short. A number of people have reacted to me by saying Star Trek is just fantasy. Well, it's in a way of speaking, I guess what they're saying is it's not relatable. It's just something that doesn't relate to my life. Quite the opposite. I think Star Trek, especially in its heyday for decades, there have been several factors. Number one, each of its productions has the producers behind each of its productions has known that they must produce good quality. Number two, high quality, and respect its audience. Gene Roddenberry is quoted as saying there's an intelligent audience at the other side. I think he said the other side, the other end of the television screen, on the other side of the television screen, meaning we know that there are intelligent people who are looking for more, who wanting to grow from a television series that they're watching, and Star Trek has lived up to that. Every time there's a new production, new comic book, new television series, new whatever it is, they know there should be high quality. And I remember Leonard Nimoy. There have been memos written by Leonard Nimoy insisting on dignity. Like his character in the series Spock, he pushed the production staff when there was time to remember to depict his character of Spock as having dignity and intelligence. All of the characters should be portrayed with dignity and distinct characteristics, and the series should not talk down to its audience. It should lift them up. That's high quality. Number two, Star Trek has sometimes, maybe this is hyperbole, but sometimes Star Trek has had some of the best moments that would be along the lines of Shakespeare. Memorable lines, great drama, dealing with human conflict. Even though it may be an alien species or something, it's relatable as human, I don't want to say necessarily human conflict, but conflict relatable to a human audience. Wherever you are, in the United States, in Europe, in Nigeria, in Africa, in Asia, in wherever you are, Australia, whatever you are, they can relate to these conflicts. And you can do more with science fiction and sometimes fantasy, like in the case with Star Wars, to exaggerate the conflict so that there's a clear, relatable conflict, but it's told in enormous situations or enormous circumstances, like for example, hypothetically, your family could be in danger of losing something. Well, you could dramatize that and put that in the scope of a planet being destroyed, about to be destroyed, or a civilization threatened with extinction or something like that. It's the same type of conflict. The author is making the same message. It's just dramatizing in grander scale. That's the best phrase, grander scale. More imaginative, visually more stunning visual scale, and Star Trek is great at that. So you've got the high quality, you've got ability to tell. Well, no, let me rephrase that. You've got what Star Trek. These are the factors that make Star Trek really great. You've got high quality, respecting its audience. 2, you've got the ability to use science fiction to dramatize relatable conflict in interesting and imaginative ways, and perhaps at a grander scale, in scenes with memorable dialogue that sometimes is approaching great works of literature. Okay, and 3, you've got excitement. I could go on, but those are 3 primary reasons why Star Trek isn't just flaky, cuckoo stuff that is just for kiddies or selling merchandise or something. And unfortunately, a lot of people, well, I don't want to say a lot of people, but sometimes people, acquaintances who are not familiar with Star Trek, don't understand it, don't understand my fascination for it. And when I say sometimes, or I've felt in my mind like I wanted to say, if you want to understand me better, watch Star Trek. Try out Star Trek. All right, so let me put this into words. So it pains me that I understand, not just superficially, but I understand the phenomenon of Star Trek from a creator's perspective. I understand, I've read books about it, I've watched documentaries about it. From a director's perspective, from a creator's perspective, I understand what the producers, all the production staff had to work with in the 1960s and the 1980s and 1990s, before Star Trek became more widespread. Of course, in the 2000 something or others, of course, the internet came along, but so forth. But back, especially in the original series, they had to tell great stories. They had to appeal to an audience. They had to, well, I'll say, rather than saying they, I'll say Gene Roddenberry, the series creator, when he was designing it, he didn't have a Star Trek series to piggyback on the fame for. He had to create a new series. He likened it to a popular genre at the time on television, which was Westerns. So some part of his television pitch was Westerns, except with ray guns and so forth. But what he actually had in mind was what he was doing in other series, like he wrote for Dragnet and Have Gun Will Travel, so forth. He would, no matter what the scenario or the premise of the show that his story would be placed in, he knew he had to tell a compelling story that had a point to it, that had a message, and he did not want to become too preachy. He should not become too preachy. That's an aspect of television for a mass audience. That's basically an aspect of good storytelling. He should convince you of his message. He should point out the pros and cons. He should make arguments on both sides in his story. And then at the end, the pros of his argument in the story should outweigh the cons. Maybe one pro argument outweighs all the cons in the argument. But that's good storytelling. And if you look into the theory called Dramatica, you will read more about that. All right, so let me move on to my thoughts about how I would do a Starfleet Academy show. First of all, you must talk to your audience. You must make a show relatable to your audience, somewhat recognizable. Now, Gene Roddenberry did this by having a naval type of allegory. Then again, there we go again, allegory. The original Star Trek series was, in some sense, an allegory for the Navy. in outer space. And in some sense, he pitched it as Wagon Train to the Stars. Nobody would probably, hardly any of you would probably understand what that means. But Wagon Train was a very popular television show at the time. He created a show which was recognizable. A lot of people at that time, this is 1960s, so 20 years earlier was World War II, and these people, the audience and the production staff, were all familiar with or probably likely served in the military to some extent or knew somebody that had. So by using naval or military parlance, that was relatable to the audience. You have a Starship Enterprise, you have a starship, and it's like a military vessel. It's like an aircraft, somewhat like an aircraft carrier. You get what I mean. It's like a battleship, which people would be familiar with from World War II. You'd have officers, and it would be in an environment that people were familiar with. It's just set in outer space and had some science fiction themes. Science fiction themes would be more storytelling and message. I mean, it would be couched in more of a science fiction atmosphere or setting, but it's just translated from what we're familiar with. So I'm concerned that that's what Starfleet Academy, the new series, may not be doing as well as it should. All right, so here's how I would do a Starfleet Academy show, and I've not seen these television series myself. Really, I'm familiar enough with it that I feel competent enough to talk about. All right, so you don't want to have these cadets in unreasonably dangerous circumstances. You want to have some level of danger, but putting them on a ship in the final frontier at the outskirts of the unknown, what's known, unknown, facing incredible danger, that's unrealistic to some extent, to a large extent, and you don't want to break away your audience. So one thing that Star Trek has had is recognizable, enjoyable characters. And so I kept thinking of what kind of television series in relatively modern times would be good as some sort of example. And I thought of 21 Jump Street. People have been likening Starfleet Academy to, pejoratively to Beverly Hills 90210, or One Tree Hill, something like that. But in my mind, I thought I thought of 21 Jump Street. Even though I haven't really watched the series, I've seen bits. I enjoy the opening theme. The opening theme with the lyrics is great. But here you have cops going undercover, being put in a new situation each episode. It seems, my impression is that audiences bond with these recurring characters. You have Johnny Depp's character, you have Harry, you have Holly Robinson's character. I don't know their names, but you see them each week. They're like a crew, like Star Trek has its crew. And over time, you don't have to serialize this. Modern times, it's like everything has to be serialized. Everything, the original Star Trek series and the Next Generation, with those series, you could just watch an episode and get a good story. You don't have to have serialized storylines where this thing over here in this episode is picked up later on in like 7 episodes later or something like that. I would do the series like 21 Jump Street, or like I don't want to say 90210 because that's very much more serialized. I don't want it to become like a soap opera. Deep Space Nine did that, and it turned me away. X-Files did the same thing, but then of course I was watching. Well, even then with X-Files, that serialization turned me away a little bit too, especially when it became much more so in later on in later seasons. But I'm going off tangent. So on a tangent. So I want to create a series that has a message, a strong ethical message, which Star Trek has always had at the very core, even from the very first episode, The Cage, the pilot episode, The Cage, deal with a thematic, a conflict, a central conflict with themes and aspects explored. And from what I've seen of 21 Jump Street, I think you could easily translate that into like a way of telling it in something like a Star Trek series. You'd have a continuing cast. Of course, I don't want to focus on the adults. I want to focus on the cadets because that's the focus. I want to explore their exploration. I want to explore their growth and maturity during the series. And I think that's what audiences watch 21 Jump Street for. That's what they watched Beverly Hills 90210 for. Even The Facts of Life. They weren't necessarily watching it for Edna Garrett, her growth. They were watching these children grow up into young adults. So I would have I wouldn't have like 20 something different characters or whatever. I would have a core group of characters. 7 is typical for a series, maybe 6, something like that. And I would know I would treat the species. Let me see how to put this. I would make it multifaceted in terms of what species I'm making the characters. I would make them a good mix, but I wouldn't just pick the races from past series because they look interesting or they look spacey or otherworldly or something. I would take the culture of each species and design each character with strengths in mind. Let me take you back to the original Star Trek cast, and then even the Next Generation cast. They did this very well. Gene Roddenberry, I'll just say Gene Roddenberry, even though there may be nitpickers who will say, well, this other producer in the show, involved in the show, had help in designing this. I'll just say Gene Roddenberry just to keep it simple. He designed characters, the central characters, with distinct personalities that had strengths and had weaknesses, largely strengths or relatable traits. Their traits, their personalities matched with their job, their function on the show. I saw the same thing with this in Night Court. Maybe that's more relatable. Sorry, my elbow. This shirt was torn. Sorry about that. I forgot it. In Night, I know there'll be like, I'll welcome any responses, any comments below at this point because I don't really get any. But I know there'll be like 3 people. There are comments. They'll be about my stupid torn shirt. But anyway, in Night Court, the judge had a unique take on relatable circumstances coming into his courtroom. So they had the judge being comedic and very ethical and introspective. You had a assistant district attorney. Now, when you go into a court, usually you're the defender. You're defending your own case. Some wrong defender. Anyway, when you go into a courtroom, the long arm of the state or the municipality, in the guise of the district attorney, would be an adversarial feeling for you. So it's probably why they make the assistant district attorney an antagonistic kind, unlikable kind of character, but yet they made the character, though unlikable, have funny, sort of relatable in some way traits that make him both disgusting and there's a term for it, not enjoyable, but like that you would enjoy watching. You don't have to necessarily believe in what the character is saying, but you have to understand and relate to the character. The character must seem relatable, familiar to you. And the public defendant, Christine Sullivan, was very charming, was very nurturing and sympathetic. Not necessarily nurturing, more sympathetic and sort of a bleeding heart type. You want that in a public defender. The clerk, his job was the job of a clerk, which should be to give information, provide information to the judge. He was like a yeoman to the judge. Technically, in naval parlance, he was a yeoman. Despite Star Trek typically using women, casting women as yeomans, that was really confused. That's Gene Roddenberry and maybe the sign of the times. But a yeoman could be male or female. It's essentially a clerk who provides information. So Mac, the clerk, was a good guy, was an all-around average Joe who was helpful and so forth. So he matched his role. What I'm saying is each character had traits that matched the role that they were in. Going to Star Trek, the original series, Scotty was fascinated by technical aspects. He was the chief engineer. Spock basically was the sidekick to Kirk from the days of like the Lone Ranger and Tonto, and you'd have a sidekick. You'd have, like, if James Bond were there, he'd have a sidekick, a Bond girl or some. Spock was this library of knowledge that could help Kirk, who's the primary protagonist, resolve the problem. And so he was very scientific. I don't need to go into much detail, but that was his function, and that's what he did. And he was a Vulcan, and Vulcans were more science-based or knowledge-based, logic and reason, not emotional. So that fit the character, and I could go on, but I hope you get the point. So I would design these characters in my take on Starfleet Academy the same way. I would choose species that would characteristically fit different aspects of the story, of any given story. One would be emotional, one would be logical, one would be, and I wouldn't copy the original series. I would just, that would be a superficial way of doing it. In other words, I would not just place a Vulcan or a Klingon or whatever just because we need an aggressive type and we need a logical type or whatever. That would be a superficial way of doing it. I would design the characters based on what avatars I would need telling the show. I'm going to go a little bit into Dramatica theory for a moment. In Dramatica theory, Dramatica says that a well-told story is simply a dilemma or a conflict told with illustrations of different points of view on that conflict. And each illustrated perspective is a different character. So it's not necessarily that Kirk is doing something in an episode. It's, at least in the objective story aspect, it's that the desire to pursue resolving the problem is represented by Kirk, and this is how it's being shown. This is how it's being illustrated. Spock would embody the impulse or the activity of thinking through the dilemma or problem. The antagonist, it could be a Klingon or Romulan or whatever, is not just that Klingon or that Romulan. It's an antagonistic force trying to perpetuate the conflict and trying to prevent the resolution of the conflict. That's the difference between just writing characters, just making up and writing characters, and actually doing what a true skilled storyteller would do, which would be examining the conflict at the heart of the story, the dilemma at the heart of the story. So that's a little bit of Dramatica, and that's one of the aspects that really appeals to me about the theory and why I think it's really good. So anyway, I can go on about Dramatica another time. All right, so back to Starfleet Academy, how I would design it. I would have a core group of like 7 characters. They would be a team, and they would... I also thought about the TV show, The Paper Chase. And there was a movie. I think it was based on a movie with John Houseman. I thought of The Paper Chase. I thought of Facts of Life. 21 Jump Street. What do they all have in common? They have some kind of situation presented to them, probably in an opening teaser like Star Trek does. Star Trek has an opening teaser presenting a new problem. Somebody's been shot. We don't know what happened. Some kind of weird mystery. Something has to be resolved. Then you have the opening theme song. Then you get back and you have this team put into the scenario. Now, in 21 Jump Street, you had their boss assigning them to this school. You have to go into this school, infiltrate the school, by infiltrating the school and getting to learn the different people, become friends with acquainted with the classmates and so forth. That gives us, the audience, the chance to learn about the new situation, just like with Star Trek. They beam down to a planet and they basically infiltrate the planet. So I don't want to put them... I don't know how I would do this. Personally, I don't know how I would do this. I wouldn't want to place them in extreme danger because they're Starfleet Academy, and I want to make this realistic and relatable so that the audience would find it believable. You don't put Starfleet Academy cadets in extreme danger, and yet I want to present them with... I want to present real drama to the audience. So I thought of turning this inward. I don't want to make it too internalized, because then it would just be one of the 7 characters having a personal problem the whole episode and so forth each week. There must be some external conflict. So I don't know, honestly, how I would do that. But I would make it more intellectual. I suppose one thing I do know is that I would make it smarter than from what the reviews have been like for Starfleet Academy, from what I've heard. I would have each character have some sense of dignity, each character have strengths and weaknesses, and demonstrate how this group of 6 or 7 people have the potential to be a very good cohesive team. And of course, you've seen that in Star Trek throughout the original series and in the movies and so forth. They are clearly a cohesive team that depend on each other and work together. And that's another reason why I thought immediately of 21 Jump Street. They're put in danger. See, I guess I'd have to watch 21 Jump Street to see how they do it, and make it believable, make the act of putting them into danger each episode believable, and yet have some danger to it. So I suppose that. One other thing before I leave. People are cheering right now. One more thing before I leave. I have a lot of knowledge about Star Trek's past. I'm not just reading something on a Wikipedia page or something. I intimately know the history of Star Trek. I know certain races, certain species, and so forth. And I know not to put up a character who's already supposed to be dead or make errors, or like I know in Starfleet Academy there are two, I think at least one character who wears glasses, and I know in Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, there's a moment when Kirk's best friend McCoy gives him a pair of glasses. And the explanation being that even though in the future people don't normally wear glasses, there's a prescription for Retinax that would cure that problem, the need to have glasses. However, Kirk says, "I'm allergic to Retinax," but I know that they needed. In that movie, they needed the glasses to represent that he's getting older. The character is getting older, and he's confronting aging. That's another thing I want to talk about, actually. He's confronting aging, growing older, and he needs to reclaim his youth during that movie. So they needed glasses in there, but they gave a sensible explanation that, as McCoy says, for most people your age, I recommend Retinax 5. And then Kirk says, I'm allergic to Retinax. That easily explains it. I want to talk about the themes. What kinds of themes would I have in the show? I would explore themes of that modern audiences, because you're speaking to a modern audience. Gene Roddenberry knew in the original series, of course, he wasn't the only one writing the episodes. Of course, people would argue that he rewrote a lot of the episodes, much to people's dismay. But he had ideas. He wasn't just piggybacking off of what looks cool or nice. He was motivated to create Star Trek, use science fiction as an allegory to talk about, as he said, God, sex, war, love, nature, and a whole bunch of other things, racism, terrorism. But he would couch it in a science fiction context. And as he said at one point in the opening to his Star Trek Cage pilot featurette, he said, and maybe they would look past it because it all seems so make-believe. How he phrased it. I agree with one of the authors of one of the books about Star Trek. The producers knew what they were handling, what they were dealing with, but it was good, so they went along with it. I'm sure that they knew there were deeper themes to Star Trek, clearly in every episode, and so that's another thing that made me remember 21 Jump Street. I don't know how preachy it was. I would level off on the preachiness, but I would still deal with aspects of maturity. These are Starfleet cadets. They took a rigorous, in order to get into the academy, they had to have gone through a rigorous entrance exam that many people fail. Well, like Wesley Crusher in Star Trek The Next Generation failed on his first try, and he can reapply next year. It's like the best of the best. Starfleet cadets are the best of the best, and that's where dignity comes in. You treat these characters as believable in that they are like Naval Academy cadets. even though I've never been in the Navy, gone through military training, I respect the military training. I would not design a character that has not stood up to and been able to endure the rigorous training required to go through a military academy. And NASA Academy too, although I think much of NASA is made up of military people, Air Force and so forth. So I would have the characters be believable as having graduated or I would have the Starfleet Academy characters, the cadets, be believable as being Starfleet caliber. That doesn't mean that they don't have human dramas and conflicts and foibles and so forth. Like with any show, like even after the academy, there are instances where in the military you have strange personalities, so forth. But I hope this doesn't turn people off. I'm thinking of Facts of Life simply because it's more familiar to me. 21 Jump Street is not as familiar. I know in 21 Jump Street they dealt with drugs and addictions and I don't know what, plagiarism and so forth. I don't know what. But like, for example, plagiarism. You could do a good episode about plagiarism in the academy. What other aspects of going through college years, because these would be college years for these characters, what sorts of conflicts would you experience that the audience can relate to as college students set in a military academy? That's how I would treat it. Facts of Life. These were growing up. These were formative growing up years. The Wonder Years dealt with the childhood pangs, I guess if that's what you call it, of growing up during those middle school and early high school years, the tweens to teens. This would be an older set, so they'd be in college. So that's why episodes of that's why series like 21 Jump Street came to mind. That's why the Paper Chase came to mind, and even the TV show Fame. When it was on, I was too young. I was I was about 10 years old when the TV series Fame was just going off the air, I think. But now I have the first 2 seasons on DVD, officially released on DVD. I enjoy the theme song very much, and I have, around 2010, whenever it was, I watched Glee, and let me tell you what fascinated me, what enamored me for Glee, towards Glee. First of all, the advertisement was, I think, a Madonna tribute episode, and of course you know what that is, and I like Madonna. I watched it. This is halfway through the first season for context, and then I watched the earlier episodes. And all right, I enjoyed some aspects of Glee. I growing up in the 1980s, spending a childhood in the 1980s. I love 1980s music, and I liked the fact that they used 1980s music thematically, or just in general music. They used, let me rephrase this. They chose music that fit thematically with the scene. That's very important. You don't just superficially, I think Glee unfortunately sometimes did this, but you don't just stick a song into a scene because the song title, or on a superficial level, the subject matter seems to be about whatever's going on in the scene. You want to pick a song that matches thematically with the dynamics of the scene itself, with the theme itself, the conflict. It's all about conflict. You want to match the conflict in the song with the conflict in the scene. So that's what I enjoyed when I was enjoying Glee. and I like the structure of the show, the setup of the show, like the premise that here's a teacher coming in to stand up for the arts, as being important, as just as important as reading, writing, and arithmetic. I like that. At times, it seemed, that's not childish. That's not the word I'm looking for. Not kooky. Like fun. Like there's a term for it. It's like, when you watch an episode of Charmed or something. There's a term for it. It's like geeky fun or something. Geeky fun, I think, communicates what I'm getting at. There were aspects of that. That was okay. I could understand that. But excuse me for coughing into the microphone. Non-existent editor, please delete that, which means nobody's going to delete it. Then I was reminded about Fame, and I watched some episodes of Fame, and they were more seriously toned. I mean, the episodes seemed more as having a serious tone to them, whereas Glee seemed to have more of a fun tone. Not to say that watching Fame wasn't fun, but Fame seemed to have more of a serious tone, whereas Glee seemed to have more of a guilty pleasure. That's what I'm looking for. Guilty pleasure watching it, just like Charmed. I favor the tone of Fame. I want these characters to really be as dramatic as possible. Not overact, but I mean have the situations and the conflicts that they're confronting be as I don't want to say extreme because that carries a different tone. Be as broad and theatrical, as dramatic, basically as dramatic as possible. So I wish you could kind of combine the two. I wish you could have you can't really have an updated version of Fame because that would be with more modern music and that would turn me off, although I might still try it out. What I would really love would be, ironically, Fame aired during the 1980s, and I don't know how much 1980s music was shown in the show. I know there was music in the show, but and it had different teachers in the show. Would Starfleet Academy benefit from doing a show with several different teachers, like in Fame, or more like Glee, where there was a central teacher, and something like 21 Jump Street, where there was a central boss who would fulfill the teacher role. In other words, telling them you need to go through this mission, you need to do this, and so forth. I don't know. I think, honestly, it would work best to have a central one character teacher, boss. And although I haven't watched episodes of The Paper Chase, I've seen bits, and I've seen John Houseman act in other things and so forth, like in Silver Spoons. I think I would want somebody like John Houseman or some kind of central teacher being the ultimate boss, or like in 21 Jump Street, I don't know who the characters. If you've seen 21 Jump Street, you know what I'm talking about. The person in charge of this team, send them on their mission. I think I would aim towards that and have other teachers perhaps in the periphery or the background, or show up in an episode or something. So anyway, I think those are all my thoughts I would want to say. So thank you for going through this. It's longer than I expected, longer than I planned, but If you enjoy the show, if you enjoy this podcast, let me switch back to the visor of being a YouTube content creator. If you enjoy these topics, consider subscribing to my channel. Consider offering me good places where I can go for speech consultation, because clearly I need it. My years of Toastmasters are in the past. In the past. And I'm a lazy editor. But I have several documentaries I have in mind. I'm really developing this ecosystem, this online ecosystem behind the scenes, even though I haven't posted as many videos as I want to. I joined Amazon affiliates program, so I want to be talking from the heart, talking genuinely, reviewing products that you can get on Amazon, and I'll be completely open. I got them from Amazon. You know, they are available on Amazon, but I want to actually talk about products that relate to this YouTube channel. There's a podcast about the paranormal, primarily UFOs, and providing alternative explanations that aren't necessarily aliens or people from outer space or whatever. More prosaic explanations, but yet interesting in the sense that, what about this perspective on some UFO case that you've heard about? I have another podcast about toy franchises, primarily about 1980s toy franchises that I want to get into gear. I have you can watch these. I have a podcast that will perhaps be my first documentary. It's the Samantha Bahar project, from concept to stage, about my female persona development and what it takes to become a singer, songwriter, what it takes to develop a female persona, an alter ego persona, makeup, and that relates to stage. Not stage, but that relates to special effects and so forth, and presentation, illusion, and so forth. And music and so forth. And there are a few other about the inner workings of the Torah text, the Jewish, what people call the Pentateuch, or the 5 books of Moses. There's a lot more fascinating stuff within the text that's just lost in translation, literally lost in translation. And those are the how movies work, where I talk more about Dramatica theory and aspects of what makes a good story, how to tell a good story, how to tell a good movie. And I want to, if I can't use clips, because YouTube or whatever, the powers that be will copyright strike them, likely. So I don't want to risk that. So I'll use still images, regrettably, but I will talk about aspects of films and scenes in films and construction of films and TV, so forth. So those are the podcasts that come to mind. And if you like that stuff, consider subscribing, consider liking this video. I hope you make it more of a routine watch, and I will do my end of the bargain by providing more content. So until next time, so long.